These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that. Though, because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Senator.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot to talk about today, an awful lot of the program. In the first hour, I want to get into this idea that a middle class, I think most people think that a middle class is like a normal thing. That, you know, hey, you have a capitalist economy, you have a functioning democratic government, and therefore, you know, small d democratic, and therefore you will have a middle class. It's not a normal thing. Middle classes have to be intentionally caused or created, or whatever the right phrase is. So I'm going to get into that in a minute. Secondly, when will voters figure out the scam that rich legislators like Joe Manchin are running? We'll get into that. In our second hour, is Clarence Thomas going to help the Supreme Court blow up the January 6th investigation? Inquiring minds want to know. And will firing anti-vaxxers from the military and the police be just like the most efficient way to get rid of far-right wingers? And Judd Legum is going to drop by in our third hour about how Virginia's school boards are being weaponized to help elect a GOP governor. This is a small glimpse, and I think the larger context here is what's been missing from most of the reporting around this. This is a small glimpse into a much larger national election manipulation system that has been created by some right-wing billionaires that's really pretty breathtaking. But to start out, my rant today, my daily rant today, and it's one of the better ones over at HartmannReport.com. There's nothing normal about having a middle class. It has to be chosen, is the headline. And it's true, the American middle class has collapsed. We're heading in the direction of looking like the 19th century England that Charles Dickens wrote about in his novels. 5 years ago, the American middle class ceased to be more than half of us. We went from 2/3 of Americans being in the middle class when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 to 49% in 2015. I'm sorry I don't have current numbers for this. That was the last time that Pew did a really in-depth study on it. Presumably it's less than 49% now. But NPR commemorated that 5 years ago with a headline, quote, "The tipping point. Most Americans no longer are middle class." This year, we just got some new statistics, actually just last week, from the U.S. Census and the Fed that show that for the first time in American history, for the first time in my lifetime, the share of wealth held by the top 1% of Americans has exceeded the share of wealth held by the 49% of Americans who are, quote, middle class. The headline over at Bloomberg from a couple of days ago, top 1% of U.S. earners now hold more wealth than all of the American middle class. Which raises the question, how do you get a middle class? Most people think that capitalism just produces a middle class, right? You've got, captains of industry who build factories, and people go to work in those factories or those retail stores or those whatever it may be, and they get paid a salary, and that salary turns them into nice middle-class consumers. Not how it works. That's how it works in a regulated, taxed capitalist economy. But that's not how it works in an unregulated, neoliberal, low-tax capitalist economy, which is what we've had since 1981. Having a middle class is a choice that we have to make as a society. We have to decide. In 1980, Reagan decided no more middle class. It's pesky, it's problematic, it's a pain in the ass. And there's a reason for that, by the way. The reason that Reagan decided that we have to do away with the middle class, and just think about what America was like, if you're old enough to remember this, or if you've read any history books, in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected, it was the tail end of 20 years of movements in the United States, social movements that started in the 60s in a big way. There was the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement, the labor movement, the environmental movement. I mean, in fact, we could go back, the civil rights movement kind of crescendoed in 1964 and 65 with the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. But it was the result of movement politics, largely driven by people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. You had the women's movement, which came out of the birth control pill being legalized in 1961, being in widespread use by 1965. Out of that came, women saying, hey, wait a minute, now I can control my fertility. I want to be in the workplace. So we had, this discarding of the old idea of the woman as the housewife. Louise and I last weekend were just looking for something dumb to watch on TV, and the TV we have in the bedroom is a Roku TV, and they were advertising Bewitched. Remember Samantha, Elizabeth Montgomery, and Dick York? And so we watched a couple episodes of Bewitched, and it was like this kind of window into another time and another world where she's trying to be a housewife, right? That's her job. That's what women did in the early 60s in our society. Well, women said, no, I want to be part of the labor force. And by the 70s, we had this huge women's movement in the United States. Ralph Nader wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, which kicked off in 1965, which kicked off a major, actually that was 67, 65 was Silent Spring. But anyhow, that kicked off a major consumer movement in the United States. That's what provoked Lewis Powell to write his memo. He cites Nader in the memo by name. And then you had, in 1965, you had Silent Spring, published by Rachel Carlson. If I'm remembering my years right, it was certainly in the 60s, both of them. And that kicked off the environmental movement in the United States, which led a decade later to Richard Nixon signing legislation creating the Environmental Protection Agency. So in 1980, when Reagan came into office, we had 20 years of young people in the streets, workers in the streets, environmentalists in the streets, consumers in the streets, and the rich people in America and the big corporations, they were over it. They were like, no more, no mas. This is what happens when you have a strong middle class, because in the 60s and 70s, we had the strongest middle class the world had ever seen, the United States had ever seen. And it had grown as a result of high tax rates at the top, so the rich people, rather than taking all the money out of their corporation, which is what they do now, had to leave it in the corporation. Otherwise, hey, why pay 91% income tax, right? So they left it in the corporation, and the corporation used that money to pay decent wages. And you had a strong labor movement. So Reagan came into office and said, we don't want any more of these movements, right? This has just been tearing America apart from the conservative point of view. Keep in mind, conservative means we're here for the rich. Always been that way, right? Whether it was the conservatives in the 1770s who were opposed to separating from England, or people like David Hume, the British conservative historian, who Jefferson liked to trash every opportunity he had, or whether it was people like John C. Calhoun in the 1800s, who were advocates for slavery and oligarchy, or whether it's, the right-wing fossil fuel billionaires today. They are always advocates for oligarchy, for their own class, and they're always opposed to a middle class. Well, how do you get rid of the middle class? How do you get rid of those pesky people in the streets who are hassling us all? Easy. Cut their wages. Move them from the middle class into the working poor. And they will no longer feel brave enough on college campuses to protest because, hey, now they've got $100,000 in student debt. They will no longer feel brave enough to go on strike at their place of work because, hey, there's all kinds of scabs and the laws have changed and we can bust the labor unions. I could go through every single one of the movements, but you get my point. So we chose in 1933 with Franklin Roosevelt to build the first really substantial American middle class. And we accomplished that by the 1970s. And we did it through regulating the economy by things like allowing labor unions, saying, sorry, corporations, you cannot destroy labor unions. So regulation and taxation. And we did it by taxing the very rich at 91%. So that, after, now it's a tax bracket, right? Your 91% taxes didn't even kick in until you were making more than about $3 million in today's money, which is why most CEOs made under $3 million right up until the 1980s. And now, of course, we got a bumper crop of billionaires, which just drains all that money out of the middle class and throws it into the money bins of the top 1%. Who now own more wealth than the entire American middle class combined. So, do you want a middle class back? I mean, this is the question that we need to be asking ourselves. There is no discussion of this in public that I know of. I've been writing about this for years. I mean, this is the basis of my 2005 book, Screwed. I've written, at least once a year I write an op-ed about it. This year, it's today's over at HartmannReport.com. That middle classes don't normally emerge in capitalism. What you have instead is Charles Dickens' world. You have a small number of very, very rich people at the top. That would be the royal family and their friends, and the House of Lords, the industrialists of 19th century, 1800s England that Dickens wrote about. They weren't even in A Christmas Story. Then you have a small middle class, which is basically the managerial class and the professional class, the doctors, the lawyers, the company managers, and the small entrepreneurs, the small businesses. That's the middle class. That's what Scrooge was. In A Christmas Carol, in Dickens's book, he was the middle class. And they were a very small slice. You had a 1% who were very wealthy, you had a 1 or 2% who were the middle class, and then you had this 95% plus that were the working poor. That was Bob Cratchit and his son Tiny Tim. And that is what's normal. That's how when capitalism is not regulated and taxes on the rich are not high, that's what you get. And that's the direction we've been heading ever since 1981. Now, we can make a choice. We can keep heading in that direction, or we could start the process of reversing it, which is exactly what Biden's Build Back Better bill does, by starting to raise taxes on the super rich to pay for it. And we're not even raising them back to where they were before Trump came into office. But it's a start. Do we want a middle class? Nobody is framing this question in this context, to the best of my knowledge, and everybody should be, because that's what's at stake here. So does this make sense to you? I hope I'm getting through. And how do we spread this message outside of my, ranting into the air and writing these pieces at HartmannReport.com?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Teresa in Augusta, Georgia. Hey, Teresa, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, I admire what you're doing, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm really proud of what you're doing. And I have a question about First Amendment rights. When there are certain people who can tell you what they want you to learn in school, they can tell you what you are supposed to be, where you're supposed to be at. They can say whatever they want to say, and it's always protected speech. But when
Teresa, I just lost you. I think maybe your thumb just got put over the microphone or something. I'm not sure what happened, but I can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, okay. Finish your thought.
Sorry about that. The thought is that so many people are being told what they can say, what they can teach, what they can learn,
right,
and how they're supposed to act. Yet the other side don't seem to have that privilege. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I'm a black woman, and I live in Georgia. So I'm not being stupid when it comes to understanding this, but I seem to think there's something, going on here when only a certain demographic are allowed.
Yeah, I'm with you, Teresa. I mean, this is what the Supreme Court said in Citizens United in 2010, is if you are a billionaire or a big corporation and you want to own politics, you want to go into Virginia and mess with the political equation, which we'll be talking about in the third hour. You want to crank people up and get them all freaked out. You want to, run social media campaigns to get them to show up at school board meetings and threaten people, for political purposes. You want to do or say anything you want. If you're a rich person, that's protected free speech, and you can do it with money instead of with your mouth. On the other hand, if it's you, Teresa, in Augusta, Georgia, or if it's me here in Portland, Oregon, and when I'm not on the air, and we want to push back, or we want to speak out, or we want to learn something, and that system has decided no, you can't, then we got a substantial problem. And I think that the solution to this is, number one, to stop to reverse this Supreme Court decision that says that money is the same thing as speech. It's not. Money I've got in my pocket, speech is coming out of my mouth. These are two different things. And
that's another thing too. If these states and school boards are instituting these, well, this is what we want you to know about. This is what you can talk about. That is a violation of the First Amendment itself.
Well, in theory, that is democracy. The idea is that the school board represents the local community. There are national standards for education, but there's also, the local folks have some say in the matter. And the solution to that, would be to get yourself on the school board, or run for it. But
I understand what you're saying, that it should be, that the local people should be able to determine what's free speech and what's not. Yeah. But how can it be again?
Well, the problem is you've got all this big out-of-state money coming in and saying, oh, no, we've got to freak out on our school board about critical race theory, or about, accepting gay people, or, all this kind. And it's like, this is money versus actual speech. I get what you're saying. Teresa, thank you. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, so number one is we have to decide to have a middle class, and the way you decide to have a middle class is you re-empower your workers, you re-regulate capitalism, and you tax the rich. It's really very straightforward. We did it in the 1930s, and between 1932 and 1981, we grew the biggest and strongest and healthiest and most active and most politically vibrant middle class in the history of the world. And then Reagan came into office in 81 and said, okay, that's it, no more middle class. It's too problematic. These middle class people, you know, students out there rioting and protesting, saying, oh no, we don't want to go to the Vietnam War. You know, African Americans out there protesting, saying, you know, we want to be able to vote, we want equal rights in the marketplace. You've got, you know, people, you know, I already went through the list. No need to repeat it. So Reagan said, okay, we're going to gut the middle class. 2/3 of Americans were in the middle class when Reagan came into office. Today, it's less than 50%. Fewer than half of us are in the middle class any longer. I mean, just think about that. So what do we do about this? Well, you know, how do these guys get away with this scam? You know, for example, Joe Manchin is out there saying, no, we've got to... you know, we've got to gut the climate legislation, for example, because of jobs, right? In other words, he's using the rhetoric of the middle class to gut the provisions in the climate legislation, in the Build Back Better bill, Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill, to gut those that will provide a disincentive, that will basically tax coal and give incentives and benefits to utilities that convert to renewable energy. And he says, oh, jobs. We got to worry about jobs. Does anybody remember this piece in the Washington Post from 2017? It was by Christopher Ingram. The headline is, "The entire coal industry employs fewer people than Arby's." I'm not hearing, you know, big meat and cheese out there all freaked out about, you know, losing jobs at Arby's. This is a scam. And the guys running these scams, like in this case, Joe Manchin with his, you know, we got to save these coal jobs scam. I mean, this is the entire nation's coal industry employs fewer people than Arby's. The people running this scam are using the rhetoric of the middle class. Let's talk about the reality of the middle class. It's created by regulation and taxation.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
How much longer are we going to fall for this scam? We'll be right back. Pick up your calls after the break.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 1. or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the, after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
You're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. Apropos of my rant this morning, during the break, I was checking my email, and there was, I got my newsletter from thewriting.com, R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G. It's, we read the right-wing news so you don't have to. And the top story was from CNS News, an article by Jacob Hornberger. He's the Future of Freedom Foundation's president and founder. Right, Future of Freedom. Oh, God. And his headline is basically calling for the IRS to be abolished. Don't raise taxes on the rich. That'll bring about another damn middle class, and they are so friggin' pesky. He said instead, he says, today, both welfare state spending and warfare state spending are hurtling America toward a massive economic, fiscal, and monetary crisis. This is the perfect time for national soul searching, especially before the crisis hits, when rational thinking will inevitably be in short supply. Among the best founding principles of our nation was no income taxation and no IRS. Right. You want to kill the middle class? That's how you do it. Anyhow, George in Los Angeles. Hey, George, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
I just wanted to say, first of all, that's one of the most brilliant analysis you did when you started the show. I was spellbound.
Well, thank you. It's an old song.
It's simply, no, like you say, not too many people are cognizant of it. You said, what do we do? Okay, here's a thought. I've been around, we're the same age. I've been around a long time, too. One thing I notice that's really worrying me, and other people agree with me when I talk about them, intelligent people, we're shouting at each other, the right and the left, more. Nobody's listening. There's no, what can we agree on so we can get to something sane other than where we are now? And one idea is simply where we can accommodate the other side, where it's not something, a line in the sand, or maybe listen, or maybe they have a point. Maybe they have a point on something. In other words, where we can work things out. Okay, yeah, I think you know me from other calls. My thing is the importance of firearms and defending the weak and helpless. And I'm on the left.
Yeah, I get it, George. Yeah, and we've had that conversation. That might be an area that we can come together. I'd like to keep this focused on economics for this moment now. But I don't think you're going to, having everybody having guns or nobody having guns has nothing to do with whether you have a middle class or not. That has to do with how violent your society is, or at least how gun-filled and bullet-filled your society is. But
I'm saying I agree. To the point of, it's not just that. It's simply on anything, on not just one topic, but on things where we can on other topics too, for economic things.
Yeah, well, I'm not opposed to finding common ground. I'm all in favor of it. It's getting harder and harder to do, but I'm with you. George, thank you for the call. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's up?
Well, I've always said that Democrats had a messaging issue.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, we need to start being able to talk to people that are on the ground, people that are living and making this country move. And when you say scam, everyone knows that it's a scam. But if you said this is a modern day pimping, just throw the word pimping out there. Just say, hey, these guys are pimping you. And reason why I say that, that's how you really fertilize people's thinking. Everyone understands what pimping is, but pimping has always been like a derogatory. But that pimping, everyone's been pimped.
Yeah.
If you look at
into a crappy workplace,
right.
and yeah, I get it.
And the average kid that listens to music understands what pimping is. And when they hear the word pimping, then they understand someone's getting dogged out.
Yeah, I got it.
That's how you.
I got it, Rudy.
Yeah.
And so.
And I don't understand why having someone come out and just say, "Hey, these people are pimping you."
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm with you. I don't think that, inserting one word into our lexicon is going to magically change everything. But I'm with you that we need a broader, vocabulary to describe what's being done to working people in America. I'm totally with you. Rudy, excellent. Thank you. Jan in Denver. Hey, Jan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Love your show. Regarding taxation, it's really paying your dues, paying your membership fee in America.
To society.
If you join a country club, you pay fees because you did not build the swimming pool, but you have to maintain it. It is patriotic to be a taxpayer. And this is from the book, Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff.
Right.
And you made me aware of this years and years ago on your show.
Oh yeah, we used to have George on the show regularly back in the day, and I get it. And if you put it in this, here's the big basket frame, as it were. Number one, your point, Jan, that taxes are the price of admission to civil society. They're your dues, your annual dues to be a member of a functioning civil society. Number one. Number two, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan come along and say, there's no such thing as society. Margaret Thatcher literally said that. There's no such thing as society. There's only a collection of individuals and families. And she was echoing a 1961 book that Milton Friedman published that I have at home. I'm drawing a blank on the title right now. I think it might be Freedom and Capitalism. And this was Milton Friedman's grand contribution to our political dialogue, one of a few of them. That led to what he and Hayek and Mises called neoliberalism. They came up with that word in 1947 in a meeting in Switzerland in Mount Pelerin. And the idea that there is no such thing as society. So if there is no society, if it's all just individuals, if there's no society, how can we owe dues to society? And this has become a mantra on the right. But I'm with you, Jana, and you said it very, very well. Thank you very much for that. Paul in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Yes. I was listening to your thing about the middle class, and you're right. But, another point is if you eliminate the middle class, who can buy from the rich?
The working poor. You have what you have right now, only, it just gets worse and worse and worse. We've had capitalism for 7,000 years.
Well, yeah, they won't be able to buy the products.
Well, they'll be able to buy, they just won't be able to buy at the levels they could before. And it's one of the reasons why we saw economic growth in the United States running between 3% and 4% decade after decade in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s, and in the early 80s. And then, it kind of collapsed. We have been averaging around 2.3% economic growth, GDP growth, ever since. And in part, it's because as the middle class gets weaker and weaker, it's less able to buy and thus less able to maintain the economy. But see, from a conservative point of view, that's an okay thing, because then you get this static economy like they had from the probably 1200s or 1300s when under Henry V, I think. I don't know what year he was king, but he was the one who introduced mercantilism to England and basically started what today we might refer to as the Industrial Revolution, started, the exports and things like that, the whole Tudor plan. It was probably in the 1400s, but in any case, he started that and lifted England out of basically mud huts and dirt roads and turned it into a modern society with big cities, or at least began that process. And from then right up until the 1950s, you did not have a substantial middle class in the United Kingdom. You could argue that you began having one in the late 1800s, but World War I and World War II were highly disruptive to that process. But it really came about in the 1940s, just like it did here in the United States in the 1950s. As a consequence of high level of taxation and a strong social safety net and the right to unionize. And Thatcher undid all that in 78 in England, and Reagan undid all that in 81 in the United States. And both our countries have seen a steady decline in the middle class, and we're going back to that world that Charles Dickens chronicled so well in A Christmas Carol and Oliver Swift and I'm not remembering all of his books now. I've read several of them, but do you get my point, Paul?
Yeah, well, I get your point, but what muddies the water a little bit, Tom, is the fact of credit. How
credit? See, that's the problem, and this is where we're in this bubble right now, because credit allows people to live like they're in the middle class, even when government policy has slid them out of the middle class. And
that's a false dawn. That's a false dawn.
Well, I don't disagree with that analysis, but I would say, in a larger sense, what it is we've got this massive debt bubble right now all across the United States as a result of people trying to keep up with the middle class lifestyle when their salaries no longer support it, as prices are going up and housing is going up and medical care is going up and food is going up. And the consequence of that is that they're no longer the middle class. They're the working poor. The working poor can sustain an economy. It's not a red-hot economy, but it's an economy. And as long as the rich keep getting richer and richer, they don't care. It's fine with them. Look at how much money Bezos has made in the last year.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We talked about this yesterday. U.S. billionaire wealth has soared by 70%, $2.1 trillion just during the 19 months of the pandemic. They don't mind if there's no middle class. Thank you. David Copperfield, Great Expectations. It was the best of times. It was the worst. That wasn't Dickens. No, that was
Dickens. That was A
Tale of Two Cities. Thank you, Nate. So there you go. Anyhow, we've got people here who are better scholars of this than I am myself. Ted in Stewart, Illinois. Hey, Ted, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yes, my question, and part of the problem today is the Supreme Court is run by conservatives.
Yes.
And I have a question here. If you look at the Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens of the several states. So when it comes to the abortion ban in Texas, and the Supreme Court didn't want to hear that,
it's a clear violation of the Constitution. Yes, if you believe or if you accept, in a way, if you accept, judicial review. I mean, the Supreme Court invented the Roe v. Wade. Actually, it was the next decision down the road from that. It was, I'm forgetting. It was one of the women's health centers. In any case, but Roe v. Wade invented the kind of 3-trimester thing. The Supreme Court invented it. So, what the Supreme Court is essentially saying is, we don't agree with our own decision. We don't agree with our own law that we created as to what is and what isn't constitutional, which I would think should call into question the legitimacy of the court, or at least of judicial review.
Exactly. Why aren't they in contempt of themselves, I guess?
They are. Or they're actually what they're doing is they're allowing Texas to be in contempt of their own decisions. But yeah, and the question is this going to is the only outcome of this going to be that abortion becomes illegal in half the states in the United States? Or is the outcome of this going to be that the Supreme Court loses power? Or both? I don't know the answer to the question.
Wonder why nobody has noticed this and nobody is making any kind of a deal about it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ted. It's a very good point. I guess you and I have just noticed it and made a deal about it. So, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Joan in San Francisco. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yes, I wanted to talk about ways to de-Reaganize our laws. And I'm saying that we need to do it all at once and have a specific plan and unite the Democrats and expand the Democrats. And I actually have a plan and I think a very dynamic idea to do that. It's called Tell 10 to Tell 10 to register 100 voters. And my thought is that we also activate the activists with this plan in a very specific business-like nuts and bolts kind of way. You know, you call 10 major activists, they get 10 other major activists to each get 10 people to register 100 voters each, Democrats.
Yeah, you're talking about that driving from the top down. How about driving it from the bottom up? How about you get 10 people and they get 10 people and all of them try to be reaching out to the legislators, essentially to the people at the top?
You would have to do both. And then the next part of my idea is to make a set of laws, 10 on one, certainly do both of those. 10 laws on one side to be canceled and 10 laws to be made. And my name is Joan Rivard. I have a website called peacedrums.org.
Okay, peacedrums.org. Thank you, Joan.
And I have a book I want to send to you if they can tell me how to do that.
You'll have to discuss that with Joyce the next time you call. Joan, thank you very much for the call. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties, for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Mike in Elyria, Ohio. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
You get the Medal of Information, Tom.
Thank you.
You were talking about percentages and margins, like back in the Bewitched days.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Back in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, everybody gets those confused. Like if you had something that you bought for $1 and you want to make a 35% margin, what would you charge for it?
Well, it would not quite be $1.35, but
it'd be $1.54, and you can prove it if you have a calculator.
Right. You're $1 in. Yeah, I can't do the reverse. I was always bad with fractions, Mike.
Yeah, I understand that. And I was telling your caller, too, that when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, I knew some business owners, and there used to be a law that you had to make so much profit or you couldn't do it.
No.
Like a gas station owner? Yes.
No, it wouldn't have been a law. It might have been a contract. If the gas station owner had a franchise, then they may have had an agreement with the franchisor, with the company that they were.
Well, that could be possibly true on that. That was 5%, 5 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
But on a retailer had to make a 35% margin to pay overhead and everything else.
Yeah, that would not be a law. That would simply be a physical reality.
Right, that would be, right. And do you know how much marketing and sales adds to a cost?
Well, it depends on the industry. It can be huge or it can be small. I mean, you've got industries like car insurance where marketing is a substantial expense. You've got industries
for a manufacturer, and it's 50 to 70%.
Well, it's going to vary depending on your industry, but yeah, I get your point, Mike. Where were you going with that, or did you just want to make that point?
I just want to make that point and say that America has some growing up to do. Yeah. About learning percentages and margins. So.
Okay, I'm with you. Thank you very much. Michelle in Van Nuys, California. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was saying that those of us who understand what's going on really should, we need to educate some key younger demographic people, because they're the ones who it's really going to affect their future more. And when you look at history, like so many of the movements, it really starts when the youth get active and things. So
yes.
we as people who are, I mean, you go back even to the 60s, like somebody like Jane Fonda, who was a big name out there. And Biden almost had that before his election, in his election, was it Ariana Grande? He was getting out to bring out some of his messages of what he wanted to get out. So you have to go towards, the college campuses, the people who are willing to learn and actually where it really is a matter of their own survival. So
I'm with you. And that's where the Koch network, by the way, has invested millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in buying econ departments, in buying political science departments, and starting campus-based movements. You've got some of these young people who are now major right-wing YouTube stars who are being funded directly or in many cases indirectly through that Koch network of right-wing billionaires. They get that. And we need to, too. So, I would say, as a starting point, I don't know where else to start. I mean, this is the major premise. This whole thing about the middle class is the major premise of this book that I wrote literally 16 years ago. It's called Screwed. It still sells pretty well. The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class is the subtitle. But and it's the article that I published today at HartmannReport.com. You can take that and share it with every young person you know. But take the idea for yourself too. Just steal my information. Steal my I don't need any credit for this. This is not. And by the way, this is stuff that average Americans understood up until the 1980s. People, we had big debates about Keynesian economics.
Yeah, and that's, I work in the accounting field, and you don't know that as soon as you start talking financial stuff, people just tune out. Yeah. They don't want to hear anything. And so I have people who know people who lean towards the right because everyone around them did, and they don't understand this. And so I try to say little things to them to make them think, because you can't just come at them with a full barrage, because their instincts their hackles go up, and they won't listen to what you have to say. So it's actually a longer process with people who are more set in their ways.
No, I get it. I totally get it. Michelle, thank you. Excellent point. Russell in Sheridan, Wyoming. Hey, Russell, what's up?
I wanted to drive this idea by you, Tom. Like these congressmen are trying to tear up the act.
The Build Back Better Act,
parts. So some of them don't like this, some of them don't like that. Well, let's get them together and pass the tax.
Just raise taxes on the rich and then fight it out for everything else. The problem, Russell, is that's the line in the sand that Kyrsten Sinema has drawn. She has said, and keep in mind, this $3.5 trillion bill is entirely financed by raising taxes on rich people and corporations back to where they were more or less before Trump became president. Not even fully back to where they were when Trump came into office, and which doesn't get anywhere near enough publicity, frankly. And Kyrsten Sinema has said, I will not go along with any legislation that raises taxes on rich people or big corporations. Corporations that are showing massive profits and paying zero in income taxes. She won't go along with it. So what do we do? I mean, we're kind of stuck at that point. Russell, thank you for the call. I love the idea. And if we want to have a middle class again in the United States, there are these two simple steps that we have to take. Number one, raise taxes on the very rich, on the morbidly rich, and on the big corporations. Not just to pay for, a social safety net, but to provide a disincentive for them to rip us off any longer. Because they won't be able to keep the money, even if they rip us off. So why bother? Right? So number one. And number two, we need to get money out of politics so that our politicians can continue keeping in place systems that will build and maintain a middle class, a robust middle class. We'll continue this conversation throughout the day here. If you the things you want to contribute to it, if you want to argue with me, if you think I'm missing something, give me a shout here. We will continue. As I said, we've got a number of other things to talk about as well. Stick around. We'll be right back right after the top of the hour here.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from Chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So let me just throw this new piece into the mix, as it were. There's an interesting piece in the Washington Post. It's titled, John Eastman Isn't Going Away Quietly. Now, John Eastman, you will recall, is an attorney. He was the guy that was, part of the far right, the hardcore hard right, hate democracy, hate American principles right. They're trying to establish an oligarchy in the United States. In fact, I think you could argue to a large extent they have established an oligarchy in the United States. And he was the one who authored this legal memo to Trump's team saying that all we have to do to keep Trump in power, even though Joe Biden won the election by 7 million votes and Joe Biden won the Electoral College, the only thing we have to do is get Mike Pence to refuse to certify it and then throw the election into the House of Representatives. And even without Mike Pence, if we can just get a few states to refuse to certify their results, we can deprive Joe Biden of the majority that he has, and even if he ends up ahead of Trump, that would still throw it into the House if he has less than 50%. This happened in 1800, in the election of 1800. It happened in the election of 1824. Happened in the election of 1876. So, John Eastman was not nuts. He was anti-American, anti-small d democracy, anti-small r Republican, but not nuts. And, you know, we now know about this, by the way, because of Woodward and Robert Costa's new book, Peril, which lays out his memo. So Eastman has come out and said he expects to be the tip of the spear on litigation over the separation of powers in the United States, using lawsuits to challenge executive branch overreach. Like OSHA. OSHA laws should not exist, right? It's like, seriously. But here's the interesting thing. This guy who wants to overturn democracy. His case, and many of these other cases, are going to end up before the United States Supreme Court, in all probability. This, you know, Trump is literally challenging the right of the January 6th Commission to even exist. Says what they're looking into isn't even something that Congress has the power to investigate. Now, this is obviously BS. This is, you know, Trump trying to run out the clock, something he's done his whole entire life, right? He owed Deutsche Bank a couple $100 million, didn't want to pay him back. What does he do? He sues them for hundreds of millions of dollars. They go, oh, never mind, Mr. Trump, you can just keep the money. Seriously, that happened a little over a decade ago. Trump has always been able to either run out the clock on things by just constantly engaging in litigation, and litigation takes time, right? Or even just weasel around them. Usually, though, it exhausts people. So, but this case, this is not going to go away unless the Democrats lose the House or the Senate or both in the election in 13 months. If they do, then yeah, those investigations will almost certainly go away. And that's the clock that Trump and his buddies like John Eastman are looking at. If we can just drag this thing out for 13 months. Now, one of the players in that is going to be the Supreme Court. That's where it's going to end up. And maybe even some of this preliminary stuff is going to pop off this, you know, bounce off the Supreme Court in various ways. So what's John Eastman's relationship to the Supreme Court? Well, he used to clerk for Clarence Thomas. He's good buddies with Clarence Thomas. And what's Clarence Thomas's relationship to January 6th? Well, his wife Ginny helped pay for and organize the January 6th Stop the Steal rally that Donald Trump spoke at. Now, you know, this is sort of like, you know, Scalia not recusing himself. You know, he goes hunting with Dick Cheney and then rules on Dick Cheney a couple of, 3 weeks later. The Supreme Court, at least the conservatives on the Supreme Court, have consistently put themselves above the law and certainly above the federal code of judicial ethics. We don't need no stinking code of judicial ethics. Congress could change that, by the way. Congress, under Article 3, Section 2, has the power to, quote, regulate the Supreme Court. It can define how many people they have on the court. It can define what its budget is. It can tell them where they're going to meet. It can tell them when they're going to meet. I mean, you can basically regulate the court in a whole bunch of different ways. You can't regulate their decisions, but you can actually make exceptions to what they can decide on. Regulation and exception. Read Article 3, Section 2. It'll blow your mind. Of the Constitution. So the question, I suppose, is will Clarence Thomas be intervening on behalf of his wife and on behalf of the other planners, plotters, and participants in the January 6th insurrection attempt, this coup attempt, people like John Eastman? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that in all probability, it's fairly easy to figure out. It'll be just like it was with well, actually, it's just like it's been with a whole bunch of things, but just like it's been with every attempt to hold the right wing to account, is the Supreme Court goes, hey, no, you can't hold the right wing, And, oh, you want elections? Well, no, you can't have, the Shelby County decision. You can't have the Voting Rights Act. Sorry, we're going to take that out. Individual states can just mess with elections however they want. Now, this, of course, is much larger than elections. This is the Electoral College. So that's my first topic for this hour. Do you think that Clarence Thomas is going to help the Supreme Court blow up the January 6th investigation? Is there even going to be a successful January 6th investigation 13 months from now? And what does that say about the Republican Party, that they are unanimously, well, with the exception of Kinzinger and Cheney, both who have very, very strong primary opponents, and neither one of which will probably be in Congress next year. Outside of those two, the Republican Party seems to be all in on no longer having a democracy in America, which should give us all pause, shouldn't it? So anyhow, that's my first topic for this hour, and we'll continue our conversation about the middle class from the last hour. And then the second topic, and this is, you know, there's I've seen this in at least a half a dozen different places. Probably one of the clearest was on a blog I regularly read a couple of days ago that was talking about, okay, we've got these cops who are saying, no way. This is going on in Chicago right now in a big way, right? In Chicago, about, if I'm remembering correctly, about 40% of the police department is saying, no vaccine, no way, and Mayor Lightfoot, we're not going to go along with you. And they've got the police union backing them up on this. So how do we handle this? The suggestion that I have is that the solution to that problem and the solution to a larger problem that we have, which is the problem of right-wing cranks infiltrating our military, infiltrating anti-American right-wing cranks. You know, fundamentally the anti-government, the militia guys, you know, infiltrating the government, infiltrating our police departments, infiltrating the military, infiltrating our schools, our school boards. I mean, you know, right across the board, all these government positions. Wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out a way to purge these people out of our government? Well, there's a really simple way to do it. Since one of their main articles of faith right now is this whole idea that disease is a political weapon to use against Joe Biden and the Democrats who are in power right now. So spread the virus far and wide. Don't get vaccinated is their mantra, right? So just say we've got a vaccine mandate and you can't work here anymore. You're not only weeding out, you know, I mean, the sales pitch a couple of days ago, and I talked about this on the air, I think last Thursday or Friday, was if we get rid of nurses and doctors who don't believe in science and police officers who don't believe in public safety, how is that a bad thing? But let me take it a step farther. By removing the police officers and the doctors and nurses and the, you know, fill in the blanks, you know, whatever it may be, who don't believe in getting vaccinated, you're also purging the right-wing trolls. You're also getting the right-wingers out of your schools. You're getting I'm talking about the crazed anti-American, hate America right-wingers, the ones who are getting in people's faces and threatening them, the ones who have no respect for other human beings, the ones who don't believe that you change things and you solve problems in America through the political process, who instead are trying to do it through bullying and intimidation and threats and weapons of war. They are a cancer, essentially, on our society. Well, how do you excise that cancer? How do you cut it out? Easy. If one of their main marching songs is "We ain't getting no damn vaccination," then you say, cool. Go work someplace where they don't care. I don't know if McDonald's is mandating vaccines or not. I mean, they have a right to. Actually, I'm thinking that they probably are, because OSHA is requiring all companies that have more than 100 employees to mandate vaccines. But maybe you can get a gig someplace. Maybe, you know, you could mow lawns in the neighborhood. There's probably, the dispensary down the street from us is always paying some guy to stand out on the street with a big sign saying, hey, go to the dispensary. He dances out there with the sign. He's probably making $10, $15 an hour. There are places where these people can land, right? And there's always panhandling. But number one, getting rid of people in hospitals who don't believe in public health, getting rid of police officers who don't believe in protecting the public from a deadly disease. Seems like, a good thing in and of itself, but, you've got the added benefit that there is, if you draw the Venn diagram, the two circles, one is people who don't want to get vaccinated, the other is people who hate democracy and don't believe in America, and you put those, overlap them, and you find that they almost perfectly lay one over the other. Who can't like that? Or am I missing something here? Pick up your calls right after this. It's 18 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truths the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Liz in Los Angeles. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi. About the taxing, I think the language should be changed. And don't call them tax breaks. Don't call them subsidies. Say, it's a subsidy, otherwise known as welfare for the rich. Because that's what it is.
You're right.
And when you realize how many companies, like I think Microsoft, they're incorporated offshore, and they don't pay any taxes, and they're using our roads.
Right?
Why should they? They should be taxed.
I totally agree with you. I'm making a note to myself here. you just gave me an idea, but I totally agree with you, Liz. And I think that our language around this stuff has been rigidified since the 70s. We've been using the language of the right, and we really need to be calling things like Joe Manchin, for example, made $500,000 last year from his family coal farm. I've seen $1 million quoted elsewhere, but I'm sure of the $500,000 figure. He's acknowledged that. He didn't work for that. Right? So, in fact, it's a giant tax break. And why aren't we pointing that out? That, these are tax loopholes for the rich. I'm with you. A good one. Thank you very much for that, Liz. I really appreciate the call. Bill in San Diego. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. What's on my mind? I'm going to answer a question you put out.
Okay.
And the answer is the Republicans feel like they cannot win unless they cheat.
Well, that's because it's true.
That's
they represent positions that the majority of Americans really have no interest in. And they try to break through every now and then using typically race or gender or fear of crime or something like that. They'll find some so-called wedge issue and use that to break through in an individual election. It's what they're doing in Virginia right now. We're going to have Judd Legum on in the next hour talking about that. Broadly speaking, when you look at Republican policies, nobody supports them. Not nobody, but, it's only a small minority of Americans think that there shouldn't be a minimum wage, think that unions shouldn't be allowed to exist, think that it's okay to pollute the environment even more, think that there should be no social safety net, that Social Security and Medicare should be entirely privatized. Only a tiny percentage of Americans believe any of those things.
That's right. And so a fair election is not good for Republicans.
That's correct.
But I called to make a statement about elections and corruption.
Okay.
And I do believe, and I'm sure you do too, that we live in a corrupt system in the United States.
Sure.
It has become totally corrupt.
And that's been largely allowed by the Supreme Court, although obviously not entirely.
Yes,
largely.
That's unfortunate and very true too. And it's amazing that some egregious rulings have not been challenged right away by I don't know who would. Maybe the. Well,
that's the problem. The Supreme Court is a court of final appeals. It's the final appeals.
Yeah, I know.
So,
but you can go back with.
Well, what you can do is you can challenge Supreme Court decisions with legislation, and that's what Congress needs to do, and it's not done that. And you can validate Supreme Court decisions with legislation too. Congress back in '74 should have passed a law turning Roe v. Wade into law. Bill, thank you very much for the call. Spot on and well said. Thank you. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about Big Mail-In. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, you know, when you hear from Americans that, oh, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, I've got all the details on this video over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. But, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. And welcome back. Okay, let's talk about all this stuff. There's an awful lot on the table here, a lot of different topics. Where do we go with all this? What do we do next? How do we figure this stuff out? Alex in Houston, Texas. Hey, Alex, thanks for watching us on YouTube. I appreciate it. What's up?
John, thanks for taking my call. Sure. I wanted to string together some of the topics you've been talking about. First off, in memory of my father, he's from your generation, and it echoes everything you've been talking about. My father grew up this is kind of his origin story. He grew up he was born in 58, military brat, father left the home, left mom to, back then that was very taboo, and they grew up poor, needless to say, 3 kids. But there was a safety net for him. He strongly believed in education because education worked for him. He went from being very poor to becoming a doctor.
Wow.
And it's a testament to where, that it is possible to, to have a functional society and so on and so forth. And that did exist for many people. Mm-hmm. Of course, that future and that promise has been totally abandoned. And fast forward to his son, me, now. I was been a teacher for 10 years. I have a master's in education, but the pandemic has thrown me into a loop. So now I'm just subbing, and I have a 6-month-old daughter. I'll get to my daughter in a second, but I'm being careful with what's going on in the classroom. So I pick up assignments here and there, and it is scary because there are outbreaks seems like they're on my heels.
Right.
But anyways.
So Alex, to the point you wanted to make.
Oh yeah. So to bring it all together, yesterday I just wanted to paint a picture of the classroom now. Yesterday I had an assignment, 8th grade. It was truly hell on earth. And so education compared to now, it is just unbelievable.
What made it hell on earth?
Oh, gosh, where do I begin? Really TikTok. Everyone was doing it for TikTok. The pranks. You heard about the pranks where they're destroying the challenges where they destroy the schools.
No, I've seen. So you actually, and I saw one where it's like slap the teacher and all this kind of stuff. So that's happening.
I haven't had that yet, but a kid did have he had a pencil and a scissor out and was just eyeing me the whole time. I was ready to the point where I was wondering if I had to put strap a textbook around my, torso so I wouldn't get stabbed. But oh
God.
But yeah. I'm curious to know what you think. Should leaving after January 6th, you've really kept the pulse on that. You're one of the few people online who really saw it for what it is.
You, Alex. I can't offer you any advice if that's where you were going. I just can't. But Alex, I got to run. I'm sorry. Thank you for the call. Thanks for being a teacher. God bless you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Teachers and cops hold our future and our present, the quality of our future and our present, in their hands.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory, and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video op-ed over at thomhartmann.com. So have you ever heard of molnupiravir? It's a new drug that actually looks like it reduces the probability that you will end up hospitalized or dead from COVID-19. It's a 5-day course. You take a pill every day for 5 days. It costs Merck, the company that is selling it, $17.74 to make that 5-day, 5 pills. And they are selling it to you and me, to the federal government, for $712 per 5 pills, per, treatment course. And you say, what? And here's where it gets really interesting. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is part of the Department of Defense, provided $10 million of funding to Emory University to develop this drug, and $19 million in additional grants came from the National Institutes of Health. We paid to develop this drug, and now we're going to pay $700 for it? Really? Check it out. There's a video over at thomhartmann.com all about it. So let me just add one other thing to my rant here, for what it's worth. Joe Manchin has been negotiating with Tina Smith, the Democratic senator from Minnesota, the person who replaced Al Franken, as I recall, and about trying to get some sort of incentives for utilities to move away from coal and oil and toward renewables. And he's just been stringing her along for months and months and months. And then this week, he just told her, sorry, ain't going to happen. She came out and said, he told me last week he just didn't think we could get there on the clean electricity program. He said, the question in my mind is, what are we going to do instead? Well, Joe Manchin says nothing. Because Joe Manchin made $500,000 last year from fossil fuels by just sitting on his ass. Which raises another issue that has to do with my original opening rant an hour and a half ago about how middle classes are not normal things. They have to be created through largely tax policy. And that is that right now, if you make your living sitting on your butt waiting for the dividend checks to arrive, which is how Joe Manchin makes the majority of his income. Yeah, he gets a $180,000 a year salary from the Senate, but this is how he makes the majority of his income. $500,000 to $1 million a year every year, just waiting for the dividend checks. And this is just this is just his family's coal empire slice of it. At the same time that, to finish that thought, he's making his money on what's called passive income and pays virtually no income tax on it, depending on how it's handled. It is possible to pay literally no income tax on it. You take that money and put it in a trust for your kids, and then you borrow, or just keep it in your own personal estate, and you borrow against it, and you live off the borrowed money rather than you don't keep it as money, you keep it as stock, for example. And then, let your kids inherit the stock. They don't pay any taxes on it. You don't pay any taxes on it.
and you only have to pay a 1 or 2% fee for the borrowed money. This is how billionaires sustain their lifestyles. This is why Donald Trump is one of the reasons why he's constantly in debt. So that you pay no taxes. You pay zero taxes. Instead of paying taxes, you're paying interest to the bank. And right now, with a tax rate at 30% and an interest to the bank at 1%, it's an easy choice. This is, by the way, the same Joe Manchin, and this is not unique to Joe Manchin, by the way. This is something that every Republican in the Senate and House will tell you. Every Republican in every state will tell you. And that is that when you offer money to people, they will take that money and not work because people are inherently lazy. This was the argument that Republicans across the country made for ending the $600 a week and then the $300 a week that we were subsidizing people with during the recession that happened as a result of COVID. And this is why about a dozen Republican states ended those unemployment benefits 3 months before the rest of the country did this year. And what they were arguing was, we will show you. We're going to end these unemployment benefit bonuses, this $300 a week. We're going to end that in our state, and you will see suddenly everybody in our state is going to be back to work. And there was literally no measurable difference between the states that ended the unemployment benefits and the states that didn't in terms of people looking for work. The difference was in people being in poverty, in children going to sleep hungry, in families being thrown out of their homes, in increases in homelessness. That's where you saw the difference. But Manchin is out there, and the entire Republican Party is out there saying, oh, you can't have an entitlement society. If you give people money, it makes them lazy. Says the guy who is making $500,000 a year doing nothing. It's like, how can we even live in this world with this bizarre mixed message? Oh, you can't give people free money. You have to, you can't do that. You must force them to work for it, unless they're rich. If they're rich, it's all good. Pass it along to their kids. Take it from their family coal business. It's all good. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here. Kusai in Campo, California. Hey, Kusai, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to ask, when do we get to a point where we talk openly about the danger to national security and national interest that individual or corporate exuberant wealth makes? After all, according to the law, corporations are people.
Well, you're seeing that right now, Kusai. I mean, the attacks.
That's what I'm leading to.
Yeah. The attacks on our country, the attacks on our school boards, the attacks on our election officials, in large part, are being driven by people who have fallen out of the middle class. They're extremely pissed off. They're not sure who to be pissed off at. And so the billionaires come along and create some astroturf groups or fund some militias and say, here, the bad guys are those liberals. The bad guys are the people of color.
Yeah,
the bad guys are.
I mean,
go ahead.
After all, we are already at a point where 2 or 3 of those big corporations can budget as much money for their national operation as any of the top 5 countries in the world.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And
and those old James Bond movies come to mind. The bad guy buying an island.
Yeah, there you go. It's Goldfinger all over again. Kusai, I gotta move along. Thank you for the call. You usually offer something really useful there, and that was a good one. Gary in Overland Park, Kansas. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, early in the show, you asked how to spread the news that the middle class is not normal under capitalism. And you had another caller that called in shortly after that and said, when somebody talks about just regular economic data, people tune out. And that's something I'd wrestled with, because research shows that stories change people's subconscious minds much better than data.
You're right.
So I wrote a thriller novel about the billionaire destruction of the middle class, titled The Fourth Circle of Hell. I made it paced. I made it exciting and let the novel's heroes discover the 2,400-year history of the dark forces behind unchecked billionaire greed, from ancient Rome to today's oligarchs.
Well, they're certainly there, and I think you could put the Egyptian pharaohs in that category, too, 3,000 years ago, or 3,700 years ago, I think it is. They were the billionaires of their era. It's not like this is a new invention. You know?
No, it's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And in recent American history, they've been using a thing that I call in my book demographic necrosis, meaning society forgets the economic lessons of the past one funeral at a time. It's no accident that the time frame between the Great Crash of 1873 and the 1929 crash was 56 years, which is the exact life expectancy at the time of the crash in 29. And it's also no coincidence that between 1929 and the 2007 crash, the time between the crash was 78 years, and if you look at the government life expectancy table, the life expectancy in 2007 was 78 years.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, you're playing off Strauss and Howe's theory from The Fourth Turning, using that quote from Arnold Toynbee that when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last great war dies, the next great war becomes inevitable because we only remember the glory of the war, not the horrors of the war. And I can't argue with that. I've been singing that song for a lot of years. And very good, Gary. Is your book for sale anywhere?
It's for sale on Amazon. The Fourth Circle of Hell. It's named after his Infernos.
Yeah, Dante. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Good to hear from you, Gary. I appreciate the call. Tom in Portland. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today? Tom?
I would simply like to rant.
Okay. I'll give you a minute.
Okay. George called in earlier and said, let's find those places that we can agree on.
Right.
If the other side does not want to agree, then, I mean...
Then it's not possible.
Yeah,
I'm with
it's
you.
not possible. Exactly. And there are things that have happened in my time that are so counterintuitive to me. I will start with Rodney King. Why were those officers not charged? They were charged, but they were not convicted.
Oh, they were convicted in civil court, as I recall. It was a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
Didn't he have a large civil judgment?
Okay.
Actually, it might have been just against the city. I frankly don't remember. I'm sorry. But, we all know the answer to that question, Tom. I'm assuming it's a rhetorical question. White cops beating and killing black men, by and large, up until very recently, has not been something that society has dealt with.
No, absolutely. I went to a tremendous World Trade Organization protest in Seattle in 2000, and there were thousands of people there.
Yeah.
But the only thing that came out of it was the breaking of windows.
Right, the black bloc guys came in and disrupted everything.
That's right.
And
It's
that completely changed the narrative, right, which is what they were trying to do. I mean, that's what anarchists do, is they try to produce anarchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it didn't help the movement at all, sadly.
And if you actually look at history, they will say that nobody fought against the Iraq War of George W. Bush.
Oh, there were a bunch of us out there.
10 million people were in the streets saying, don't go.
Right. Until the election of Donald Trump, I think it was the largest demonstration in the history of the world, and it might still be, the anti-Iraq war demonstrations, because they literally took place all over the planet.
Why can we only get this in your place? Because that's not what history says.
Well, it's not hard to look it up. I mean, it was widely, the headlines at the time, largest demonstration in the history of the world, not invade Iraq. I mean, that was all over, Tom. I get it that it's fallen into the memory hole. I totally get that. And, the obvious reason for that is that a lot of people in the media were promoting that war and would rather we just didn't remember that. They were complicit. Tom, thank you for the call. It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. And welcome back. Karen in Adrian, Michigan. Hey, Karen, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, let me get to the speaker. Turn that off.
Oh, it's okay. You sounded just fine.
I had to turn off the speaker. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fine. It was fine the other way, too. So what's up, Karen?
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I just called because, history, I remember my history classes and all that. And the French Revolution, I was told, happened because the middle class had too much credit, and then they couldn't pay it. So liberty, equality, fraternity, or just cut off their heads.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you had a particularly bad winter, as I recall, that or summer maybe it was, that harmed the crops. But the main thing was that Louis and his family had been basically looting France for generations, and you had an economic crisis compounded by a political crisis. And then, when Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake or let them eat crumbs or let them eat, the cupcakes or whatever.
She actually didn't say that, but, she gets credited for it.
Yeah, I know.
They did all the other things, though.
Yeah.
But, of course, when they rewrite the history, it comes down that it was all the fault of the middle class.
Right, but I would argue that in France at that time, you had an economic system that was very much like the one that Dickens wrote about in England just maybe 60 years later, which was classic capitalism, unregulated capitalism. And so the middle class in France was made up mostly of, just like the one that Dickens wrote about. Scrooge was the middle class guy. He owned a small business. He had one employee. That's middle class. And the middle class in France at the same time would have been that same thing. It would have been the shop owners, the lawyers, the doctors, the professional people, a few people who were lucky enough to be in guilds, probably largely the Masons. And they were the only one. And so the middle class in France probably at that time was just, I would guess, well under 10% of the population. The vast majority of people in France were the working poor and the profoundly poor. And, it had just been that way a long, long time. So I don't get how the middle class get blamed for the French Revolution.
Yeah, well, but I guess the point I'm trying to make, though, is that we're at that point again.
Yes,
where
we are.
There's a lot of so many people I know who were middle class not long ago are not anymore.
Yep.
But they're not all out there trying to kill each other about it. It's just some folks are a little more resentful than others.
Well, they're trying to figure out who to blame for it. And you've got this entire right-wing machine saying, hey, if you're white and you used to be middle class and you aren't anymore, it's because some black person or some other person of color came and took your job, or some woman came and took your job. Or some liberal, Bill Clinton exported your job to China, when in fact that was Reagan and Bush's idea. The whole NAFTA thing was negotiated during the Reagan and Bush administrations. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization, all that stuff came out of the Bush, Reagan and Bush administrations. It was Clinton who finally put it into place. But we've had now 40 years of this giant neoliberal experiment. We've tried it Milton Friedman's way and Tom Friedman's way, oddly, and unrelated guys, but and it's not working. It's destroying our middle class. We need to go back to high tax rates and frankly, a protectionist trade policies. Karen, thank you for the call. Spot on, and I think you did put your finger right on it. We'll be right back. It's 51 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Viagra for your brain. We'll be right back. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program that centers around this clip from 1978.
The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. What I have to say to you now about energy is simple and vitally important. Point one, I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never.
And he continues.
Moreover, I will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000.
What could have been, huh? Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Dave in Traverse City, Michigan. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You want to grow the middle class and get rid of the creeps?
That would be a good idea.
The only way we're going to do it is to get the votes, and we're not going to get the votes until we cure an image problem that we've had as progressives and liberals ever since Reagan walked around in his cowboy boots. And the image is this: they're the rugged guys, we're the wimps.
Okay. So how do you cure that?
Well, let's harken back to FDR. What was the image there at that time?
Well, oddly, FDR was, a multimillionaire, who had a good education and all that kind of stuff. But he identified with the working class, and that's how he was viewed.
Somebody cared. Somebody cared.
Right.
That was the image, and he rode that image through several elections.
Yeah, and that's the image that Trump tried to, actually did, use certainly in the Republican primaries more than anything else in 2016.
Tom, this has been driving me crazy for years, and it's so simple to solve. It's very simple. It's advertising, it's marketing, it's social media. You pound it and pound it and pound it. And what do you say? Who is a progressive? You take a celebrity. It could be The Rock, for example. Not that I really know his politics, because I don't. Right. But he could just stand up there and say, as the question is, who's a progressive? He looks in the camera. I'm a progressive.
Right.
You take people of influence, power, athletes, and you keep pounding those images.
Have the Democratic Party start sponsoring NASCAR and football games.
That's right. These are the type of things that we need to do. And until we do it, Tom, image is everything, my friend.
Yeah.
And until we do it, we're not going to win.
I think you make an excellent point, Dave. Dave, thank you very much for that. Steve in Simi Valley, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Again, thanks for what you do. A correction from before. Rodney King, the officers in Rodney King were charged in state court, but they were acquitted, in fact, in Simi Valley. But a federal court later convicted the officers of taking away his rights.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Clarence Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Examples of, I'll make it quick, of why he's a liar and a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
During his confirmation hearings, he when pressed, he said he never, ever thought about the decision of Roe v. Wade. He said, even though there were speeches made by him, he said, well, that was done from an executive point of view because he worked for Reagan, but he said he never thought about the legal question.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just too hard to swallow. Okay, and then finally...
well, he also lied about his relationship with Anita Hill. I mean, there's a fair amount of evidence that backs that up
that's
now.
True. And finally, in the 1990s, when Clinton fought the subpoenas for the Monica Lewinsky, they went to the Supreme Court and they ruled unanimously that the president, the Clinton had time to play golf, so
he had time to do it. Yeah.
Okay, and...
although they wouldn't do that during the Trump administration, which is bizarre.
That's it. Scalia wrote it. Trump signed off on it. But during the one for Trump, when they voted 7-2 to make sure that he can go to be subpoenaed, Thomas wrote in his dissent that the president does not have time to do subpoena work because of his work.
Right.
So, I mean, that's why I just wanted to.
Trump is a fascist. Thomas is a fascist. I mean, these birds of a feather flock together, right?
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Will it ever come out? Will it ever be resolved? Probably not. Is Ginny Thomas going to end up? I doubt it. Anyhow, we'll be back. We'll continue our conversation right after this break. Stick around.
listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. The feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now, again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners' Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
The second effect of a high income.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back to our program, to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Judd Legum, the journalist and founder of Popular.info. You can also tweet him at Judd Legum, Legum. Judd, welcome back. Tell us about, you wrote this just absolutely brilliant piece a couple days ago. I plugged it on the air, mentioned it on the air. I've for a long time recommended people to go over to Popular.info and subscribe to your daily newsletter. It's really, really worth reading. But you did some really extraordinary, deep journalistic digging on this thing. Tell us about the right-wing billionaires' plan to use school boards to put Republicans in power so that they can keep taxes down on right-wing billionaires. Or at least that's how I'm interpreting this.
Right. Well, I think certainly you're seeing a really extraordinary confluence of activity around school boards on a whole host of issues, that are seemingly unrelated. The mask mandates, that's one of them. The supposed concern over critical race theory, which is taught in law schools, not in high schools or elementary schools. And other related issues, what books they're carrying in the library. And this is being used to suggest that essentially that there is a nefarious plan on the left to cut parents out, to indoctrinate children. It's expressed in various ways.
Right.
So what's interesting about this is, of course, there are parents who hold these views, but it's being stoked and amplified by a whole host of groups, many of which were just formed this year in 2021 and have seemingly vast resources, extensive paid staff. Some of the folks who are on the staff of these groups are appearing on Fox News and on other places and just representing themselves as parents, and they generally are parents, but they also have these other activities, and in some cases they're paid for this advocacy. We don't know the source of funding behind these groups, both because they're so new and because of the way they're organized. But what I basically did is, if you look at the people involved, you can see, for instance, one of the main groups, Parents Defending Education. The leader of that group has basically spent her entire career in different groups that are funded by the Koch political network. And now she's emerged as the leader of this new group that is targeting school boards. So you don't have to speculate too much to figure out, where this money is coming from and what's really fueling a lot of this activity.
Would you agree with my analysis that the reason why the Koch network would fund school boards to freak out about critical race theory or about mask mandates, which frankly I doubt Charles Koch gives a rat's ass about, but that they would fund these things instead because these wedge issues can be used to get Republicans elected who would never get elected if they simply said that their main agenda was to, encourage the use of fossil fuels and discourage taxation of rich people, to get these people elected so that they can then go ahead and encourage fossil fuels and cut taxes.
I think that's close to how I view it. But let me explain how I think of it. And I think Virginia, which of course has an election that's coming up in November, one of the few states.
This is all being used against Terry McAuliffe, is the case in point here specifically.
Elections. Now, Biden won Virginia by 10 points.
Right.
So it's Terry McAuliffe. He's the Democratic nominee. There's a guy called Glenn Youngkin, who's the Republican nominee. Glenn Youngkin knows that he really can't fully embrace Trump because he's going to alienate a lot of people. There aren't enough Trump supporters in Virginia for him to win. Right. But at the same time, he needs to motivate those voters and make sure they show up for him. So what this is fundamentally is a rebranding of the MAGA movement across all of these issues that are now being focused on school boards to excite and energize that base. And Glenn Youngkin is really leaning into this. He's going to appear in Fairfax County, which is a key Northern Virginia county, to make some sort of announcement this evening about schools. A lot of his ads are based on schools. A lot of the Republicans up and down the ticket are running ads based on these school and school board issues. So it's a way that Republicans are trying to thread the needle and win in a state where Trump is not that popular. This is not Alabama or Utah.
Another way to say that, Judd.
Not that popular. Alabama or Montana or whatever,
Yeah, wouldn't another way to say that be, basically, A, they're trying to win an election, but B, this is a test ground. This is the Willie Horton ad of our era, which was used against Michael Dukakis by George Herbert Walker Bush back in 1988. And that, where scary black guy, and Dukakis, wasn't even the governor who came up with the idea of letting, people out of prison. That was the Republican governor before him. He simply happened to be in the governor's seat when that happened with Willie Horton. So, it was a lie to begin with. but it was a lie that the Republican Party turned into a huge nationwide meme. And they coasted on that whole, we're tough on black criminals thing so effectively that Bill Clinton picked up that mantra. I'm going to put 100,000 cops on the streets, and Hillary talking about super predators and all this kind of stuff. So now it's oh my God, they're indoctrinating our children about, they're making white children feel guilty for having white skin, and they're promoting homosexuality in the schools or immorality, this kind of stuff. It looks to me like they're testing something as much as they are doing something. What do you think about that?
I think that's right. I mean, we're seeing this all around the country. It's really much more intense in Virginia because of the context in the election, but it's not just happening in Virginia. It's happening in Ohio. It's happening in Florida. It's happening everywhere. Right. And I imagine we'll see a good bit of it in 2022, but I think you're right, regardless. But I think you're right. If this works in Virginia, if Glenn Youngkin wins, and it's a fairly close election, I think most people are giving maybe a slight edge to McAuliffe now, but I think it's close. It could go either way. If Glenn Youngkin wins, I think you will see this nonstop. And so in that sense, I think it really is a testing ground for this.
Or even if he loses by 1 point, he was 10 points down when this thing started. If they can move somebody 9 points, even if Youngkin loses, what are they going to do in Wisconsin where the race might be 4 points?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think that you're going to see a lot of it. That's really why I started digging into it, was that I noticed that this was already being injected into, a lot of the 2022 campaigns that are really getting started now and will only intensify in the next few months. And there is a lot of money behind this. I mean, there are very well financed. They're hiring very expensive conservative lawyers, filing lawsuits. This is not a slapdash operation. There's paid staff, there's slick websites, there's talking points, there's FOIA requests. It's a very extensive, well-financed effort. What are the parallels between this effort and the Tea Party effort to blow up Obamacare, or at least make sure that there's no public option in it, et cetera, that was also funded by the Koch network, Koch political network, what you're referring to? Where they were showing up with $300,000 buses and transporting people to the so-called Tea Party rallies. And it was treated by the media as if it was, totally grassroots movement, when it was clearly AstroTurf. This, you're saying, is also AstroTurf. Same people, same strategy, just different topic? Yeah, I think it's definitely related. And I think the point you make about the media coverage is key. No one is going to cover in a big way just some gathering of Republicans who are upset at, Democrats who are in power. But what the Tea Party did was it refreshed that. And it said, this isn't the Republican Party. This is the Tea Party movement. We're this groundswell of opposition. It's organic. It's the people rising up. And that's the same thing. And I think using the identity as parents, which is seen as a nonpartisan position within our political conversation. You're parents. You're looking out for children. You're not partisan. You're not pursuing a particular kind of political agenda. You're trying to do what's best for your community. Rebranding the MAGA movement as this parents movement, I think, has been very effective, particularly at the local level of framing this kind of coverage and starting to shift the conversation beyond Trump. We're talking into something that's more powerful.
We're talking to Judd Legum, who is the founder and editor and author largely of Popular.info. Judd, we have about a minute, I think, until we're going to hit a break here. How it seems to me that this is just an extension of what we've seen over the last, in particular the last 4 years, it seems, maybe 5 years, with these bathroom bills and, trashing trans kids and all the hysteria. It was like they tried that. They got a certain amount of traction from that. But now we know, between critical race theory and mask mandates, they think that they've even got a larger universe of traction It looks to me like just ever since the Tea Party, they've been fine-tuning these systems. What say you?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it has a broader appeal than kind of a lot of the anti-trans bathroom stuff, which I think really just appeals to social conservatives. I mean, I think the idea is to make this a bigger tent and to create a wider variety of concerns.
Right, and that's certainly what they're doing, and again, this is being apparently driven by right-wing billionaires, right?
Yeah, we'll hopefully find out a little bit more as time goes on, but all the signs are there.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Judd Legum, you can read all about it at popular.info. Judd, thanks a lot for dropping by today. It's always great talking with you. Keep up the great work. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Pick up your phone calls right after this break. What's on your mind today? This is just incredible. If this thing works, wow. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back. And welcome back. John in Glen Rock, Wyoming. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
I have an issue with the messaging problem of Democrats. You brought up a Rifle newsletter that you get that talks about the welfare states. I think that Democrats ought to turn that and blatantly call out the red states, like Mitch McConnell called out the blue states during the pandemic crisis. I mean, I'm from Wyoming. I know why Wyoming's a red state.
Why?
Because of our leadership for the past 30 years. I've been in Wyoming for 30 years, and for 30 years, the mantra statewide has been, we need to diversify our economy, and it never happens.
Well, how does that make it a red state?
Well, we receive more from the federal government than we spend into the Senate.
Oh, by diversify our economy, you mean we need to get off federal welfare?
Pretty much, yes.
Good luck with that.
Well, yeah, I and calling my representatives is like going outside and banging my head on the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah, of course.
But I mean, I like I said, I know why my state is the way it is. Colorado is a landlocked flyover state, but they managed to have a better diverse economy than the states, So I think the Democrats ought to use that messaging and point out the hypocrisy of all of the right-wing.
Well, I think the thing that's driving Colorado is there's two things that are driving Colorado. The first is that Denver is one of America's major cities, and cities tend to be more progressive, more well-educated, et cetera, et cetera. And the other is that, they've got a really high-functioning, high-end travel industry there, with the ski lodges and things. And that attracts big money into the state, and big money tends to be a little more progressive in some cases. Not super big money. The hyper-billionaires are typically right-wing and not progressive, but rather libertarians. But I don't see you having any of that in Wyoming, John. I mean, there's a little bit of tourism in Wyoming, but mostly your major industry in the state is coal, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but historically, in the early days of the founding of the states, Cheyenne, Wyoming was actually the hub, and Denver stole that by advertising and using media and messaging.
Well, and also putting in a hell of an airport. They negotiated with a bunch of airlines to be an airport hub just at the right time, in the 80s and 90s when airlines were going from point-to-point travel to spoke and hub travel, and Denver became a hub, and that's been a big contributor, I think.
Oh, that is true, but I'm talking back in the days of the railroad.
Oh,
Cheyenne, Wyoming was a bigger city than Denver, Colorado.
Back in the
Wyoming
1890s, you mean?
Yeah, Cheyenne, Wyoming was big. I believe, I might be incorrect, that only Salt Lake was bigger, but Cheyenne was the biggest city between Omaha and San Francisco.
Wow. Well, things sure have changed. John, thanks for the conversation and thanks for the information. It's nice talking to somebody from Wyoming. I appreciate it.
Hey, not a problem.
Yeah, and keep on banging your head there. Keep on doing the good work, spreading the word. Thank you, John. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KTRC. What's up?
Well, I have one point I want to make, but your callers have jogged my memory. Talk about companies supporting like football. The Koch brothers, based in Wichita, support Kansas State University athletics. We have 4 GOP people who are trying to take over the school district here, and they're proud of it. Huh. And Wyoming is trying to sue one of the energy companies down here because they're not going to buy any more their coal because they're trying to go more to renewables and natural gas. But anyway, the point that I wanted to make is I'm 72 years old. I contracted polio in kindergarten, which would have been the 54-55 school year, right? And it has affected me over the years. And the vaccine didn't come really readily available until about 1956.
I remember.
And so I say to all of you, anti-vaxxers, mask people, wake up, because it's affected me, and I understand that COVID will affect you in your later life. Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't end up in an iron lung, but it has affected me, and so I've done just about everything I ever wanted to do. But that's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and good point, Mike, and thank you for the testimony, and get your shots. Jake in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking the call, and by the way, your opening rant was beautiful this morning, and I'm going to encourage a lot of people to see it. Now then, I'm going to talk to you maybe for 30 to 45 seconds, and I'm going to start with a detail. The detail is I'm of the opinion, being 8 years older than you are and being brought up in a very hard-hit economic area of the world, that pragmatism is probably a better word for us folks.
Than progressivism?
Than progressivism, yes, sir. That's one of my beliefs, because I'm a hardhead.
So we should call ourselves pragmatists.
Yes, that's number one, and I think we'd get a lot more independents and Republicans joining our point of view.
Yeah, that's a good one, Jake. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Jake, I owe you one. I put you on the air with only about 30 seconds there, so you get another call this week if you want to call back later on and make your second point. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776, when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man. Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation,
which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, the media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, you know, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at ThomHartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back. It is 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. You were talking about middle class this morning, and it reminded me of some history of what it took to create the middle class. A couple of things that specifically that came to my mind was, number one, the Haymarket Massacre in the 1880s in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that. It was a peaceful demonstration by the Pullman workers. And there was a firebomb, which later has been found out that it wasn't the workers that set the firebomb and created the massacre. It was the companies that did it. And the other incident that comes to mind is Matewan in West Virginia in the 1920s, the coal miners' strike. Mm-hmm. And how the coal companies brought in the Pinkertons. I don't know if you remember them. They did all kinds of work for all kinds of companies to try to break labor's back.
There was also a big one in Colorado where the police came in with machine guns, Gatling guns, and just mowed down and killed, not just the strikers, but their families as well, women and children, because they shot into the tents that they were living in.
Yeah, and I think that history tells us a couple of things. Number one, what it cost us to create the middle class, that it didn't come out of thin air. Yep. And number two is what lengths the ruling class will go to try to keep labor and the middle class down. And I think that applies today as much as it did 100 years ago.
Amen, Israel. Amen. I am totally with you, and it's a brilliant analysis. Thank you very much for that. That was perfect. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Oh, howdy, Tom. I heard you talking about all the way back to Pharaoh's day with the same old economic scams.
Right.
And, you know, if you think about the laws of science say that for every action, there's a separate and equal reaction. Well, the world of money gives you a separate action, but it might leave you with hazardous waste. It might leave you with broken products and defective products and all sorts of things. So there's a fake perpetual motion machine that's created with money, and the world, the actual Earth, has to live up to how fast things can grow, how much water is available, you know, the winds and the rains and the floods and the loss of the topsoil. You know, there's depreciation that's going on in the world, but the money world says we can grow forever.
Right, you're talking about fractional reserve banking.
Among other things, but it's fake economics, and it's the corporate state. And when you start looking at the idea that you know, Biden is being you know, razzed because he can't get these ships to land on shore, and we're going to have a sorry Christmas if we don't have all this cheap junk come floating in. You know, we're being told that the economy is more important than the earth.
Yeah.
And, you know, the president's job is to maintain the property of America. He's supposed to be the property manager of America. Trump was a pretty crappy one because he intentionally lost lawsuits which showed that we were winning, and all of a sudden he threw those lawsuits to the polluters and whatnot. He destroyed the EPA. He shredded records. And the idea that America's property needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed wisely, and the infrastructure bill's a big part of that. And the idea that somebody would intentionally poison the water or leave the topsoil to be washed away by massive storms, you know, we need an honest property manager. The Republicans are clearly going for the corporate state rinky-dink. And
and have been since, I mean, they threw in 100% with that in 1981.
Sure.
You know, the cult of Reagan and the cult of Trump are not that different. The Republican Party has been, you know, has bought into, and Republican voters have bought into the idea that a nation, an oligarchy basically, a nation run by rich people, of, by, and for rich people, where occasionally they'll throw some crumbs your way, is like the way to go. And,
well, fraud.
And then they build cults of personality around that to keep it going.
But fraud doesn't work with measurements, right? So they have to intentionally destroy the records so there's no measurements. And I'm just, you know, I'm razzing the Republicans right now because they pretend to be conservatives, pretend to look out for the topsoil of America, or to make sure that every city is strong and independent. It's not dependent upon some corporate chain or the Federal Reserve or any other Kings of London or whatever. That each conservative in America means that every town is strong and independent, and you know, unity with 50 states and what do you call it, the intercommerce stability of it, instead of having electronic money that'll just suck all of America's assets to the Cayman Islands in a matter of minutes. You know, the Republicans are fake.
So the bottom line here, your rant, David, is that we're moving toward a corporate state, right?
Oh, we've been in it. I actually think that Russia and China are also corporate states of a different type.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's happening right now is that the oligarchs of the world are getting together. And this has been going on for the last 40 years, and it's getting worse and worse. David, thank you. Very, very, very astute analysis. Susan in Seattle. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Two things quick. Friday night, when it came out that Joe Manchin killed the green energy provisions of the Build Back Better legislation, I was having a rant and raving about the situation. And the first thing that came to my mind was an old song from the 1960s called Eva Destruction.
I remember it, Barry McGuire.
Yeah. And in so many ways, I think that song is more appropriate for today than it was then.
Yeah, Sherrod Brown and I used to geek out about that song on this program.
And the second thing is, you always say despair is not an option. And I am not even part of the middle class anymore. And living on a fixed income, you have to watch every penny. And I said, I ranted on Facebook that I'm cutting back my spending by 20%, which is not a lot, but it's a lot for me. Mm-hmm. And I was encouraging people, give experiences, give your time and energy for the holidays instead of waiting for all the junk to come in, because especially the kids won't remember what presents they get, the toys, but they'll remember the time you spend with them.
True.
And, I have a few friends who actually responded in kind that, that they're considering it.
That's great. It's a start. It's a start.
It's the only language that corporate America will understand. If we cut back our spending, then it affects their bottom line, and maybe...
Yeah, I doubt they'll ever understand that. I doubt there's enough of us who will do that, but it does improve the quality of life, of your own individual life. So excellent points, Susan. All excellent points. Thank you very much for that. Bob in Wheeling, Illinois. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
I'm not sure about the way that congressional laws work. What I'm wondering is, if the Democrats cut back enough provisions, etc., on the big infrastructure bill to pass it, would they then, if they gain enough seats because they passed the big and the little infrastructure and the right to vote laws, if they pass those three, they would most likely gain seats in both the House and the Senate. Would they then be able, making Manchin and Sinema irrelevant, would they then be able to modify those bills, change them so that they get more of what they want now?
Yeah, you're building the case for incrementalism, Bob, that frankly Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have been making, which is pass the $500 billion new spending bill that has been worked out between corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans. And then, we'll improve things later when we get the glory from that. The Republicans will take all the credit for that, I guarantee you. That's why they signed on to it. They, every place where they can take credit, they will take credit, and that's not going to inure a huge credit to Democrats. Number one. Number two, it's not transformational. That piece of legislation is not the kind of thing where seniors are going to say, "Holy cow, I can go to the dentist now." It's not the kind of thing where a young family is going to say, "Holy cow, I don't have to spend $15,000 a year on child care anymore." I mean, that's all in the $3.5 trillion bill. And where, people who are concerned about the future of their children and grandchildren aren't going to say, "Holy cow, I don't have to worry quite so much about the future of my children and grandchildren because we're going to get off fossil fuels."
I know all that, but what I'm saying is it appears that getting everything in the second bill, in the big bill, now is not going to be possible. Would it be possible, is it possible, the incrementalism, is it possible to pass all three of those bills now in a lesser form?
The voting rights bill can only be passed, I think they're going to bring that to a vote on Friday, but that will only be success. In fact, I got an email. Let me just share this with you real quickly. I got an email today from FreedomWorks, from Adam Brandon, the CEO of FreedomWorks. Thomas, facing grim prospects in 2022, Democrats in Congress have moved to seize total control of our election process by passing the so-called Freedom to Vote Act. This is FreedomWorks. This is one of the premier front groups for the Koch network. A better name for this disastrous bill would be the End the Fair Elections Act, because the radical left is willing to do whatever it takes to maintain permanent power in Washington, D.C., including rigging the entire election system in their favor. What's worse is the fact that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is set to bring this election takeover scheme to the floor for a vote this week, possibly as early as tomorrow. Thomas, I know I've reached out to you a lot recently, but the stakes have never been higher. So if you haven't already, please call 202-318-4129 right now and demand that your U.S. senators vote against the End of Fair Elections Act. And then he goes
upside down world.
Yeah, it is. If this law is passed, it would order organizations like FreedomWorks to disclose personal information about donors, a dangerous prospect in today's cancel culture world, violating their First Amendment rights. It would give unelected bureaucrats, and he just goes on through his rants. But so
it's projection. It's the same thing that Trump did.
Right, but my point is that the right-wing billionaires have heavily and aggressively mobilized around a piece of legislation that has nothing to do with their economic interests other than keeping Republicans in office. and which is, you know, rigging elections. So they're just fine with that, as long as those Republicans will keep their taxes low and their companies deregulated. That's their only interest.
My fear is that if we don't get something to hang hats on, for want of a better term, going into the 22 election, if we don't have something to show for having the House, theoretically the Senate, and the presidency in one party, if we have nothing to show for it, then we will not win anything.
I agree with you.
Election.
America, I mean, and this is the thing that people are agonizing over. Americans love big action. They love big, you know, Reagan, let's completely abandon Keynesian economics, drop taxes from 74% down to 25%, blow up the economy. We're going to do all kinds, you know. Reagan was, you know, loved for that. LBJ, we're going to create Medicare, Medicaid, you know, food stamps, the New Deal, obviously, Social Security and unemployment insurance and the right to unionize. These are, you know, these are examples of really big programs that made presidents like famous. And you're absolutely right. If Joe Biden can't get something done, we're toast in 2022, which is why they're fighting us so hard.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Paul in Alden, New York. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I'm replying late, really, to your pretty brilliant rant. This first part of the show was really good. I just want to say I worked in NLRB in the Reagan years, and I agree
the National Labor Relations Board.
Yes, I did.
Okay, go for it.
And I agree with you about the hollowing out of the labor unions.
Oh, Ray Donovan was the first labor secretary in the history of the United States who was anti-labor.
Yeah. It's after Reagan and the PATCO strike, though, the management labor bar really stepped it up. They got a lot of clients, and they realized what you can do. If you lose a union election, wait out a year. Engage in what they called hard bargaining. And don't by any means agree to any kind of a contract. Throw out any kind of any proposals you think the union won't agree to, and stall out that bargain past that initial year. Right. After that, the union's status as represented can be questioned, and that's how that worked. Okay. Mm-hmm. The other strategy they came up with was provoke a strike, and I saw plenty of that.
And then use that strike
proposals, and if the union goes out on strike, that's what you want.
Right, because you can use that to break the union.
Already in a weak position, right. As we know, because the way capital moved and all that stuff leading up to the Reagan years. They were already in a weak position. If you got them to strike, you hired permanent replacements. Permanent replacements are obviously going to be not pro-union. They're going to be anti-union. Permanent replacements can stay on, and the strikers are only called back to work as needed.
Right.
As needed.
Right.
Which means they're out of job. Majority of them are probably out of a job.
Right. And
after that, that period, you can again question the status of the union.
Right.
And the union won't be around.
And a lot of that some of that came out of legislation. Some of it came out of executive action and policy by Reagan. An awful lot of it, though, came out of the Supreme Court.
The Reagan board looking at bargaining law, and they obviously made it a lot more reactionary.
Right, but the Supreme Court changed the rules of the game with multiple decisions. I wrote a whole chapter about this for my book on the Supreme Court that is posted online, actually, at thomhartmann.com/Supreme Court.
Okay.
And you know, this whole series of court decisions in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where the Supreme Court basically gutted union rights.
They did. They did. And the thing about permanent replacements, at the time it didn't have a great impact. Only later, after the Reagan impulse came in, that's when it really came into effect.
Yeah.
And the unions, like I say, were already in a weak position because of the movement of capital first to the South and overseas, stuff like that. and Reagan just jumped on their back.
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
It was a bad period.
He absolutely did. And you know, overseeing the destruction of the American middle class is something for which the hard right still celebrates Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Wasn't that wonderful what he did? You know, he busted up those terrible unions, those evil union bosses. It's like, really?
Absolutely.
You know, no more middle class? That's your plan? Paul, thanks a lot for the call.
People are only realizing now.
Yeah, I think so.
What a mistake that was.
I think so.
How bad that was.
Paul, I got to run, but thank you. You know, there were some of us who were yelling at the time, "Don't do this!" But here we are. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. It's 52 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at ThomHartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Nolan in St. Charles, Illinois. Hey, Nolan, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's on your mind today?
Good day, Tom. I grew up in a union family. Grandfathers were coal miners. Father was a contractor, and 7 uncles who were vets. So I believe in the unions because it allowed me to buy my house because I didn't have to take care of my parents, even though they lost theirs because of medical bills, and they had 80%, 80-20 coverage under Blue Cross, kind of the standard of the day. But when you look at the side benefit of the economic growth we could have in this country with universal health care, I have a couple patents and a couple pending, but I really can't hire away the engineers I need from the large corporations because the cost of health care.
Yeah.
And I just don't see how people can't see that would be the biggest boom to our economy, to let entrepreneurs, really have a go at this. It'd be a surge that we haven't seen for 100 years.
It would also save us all a pile of money. As an employer, I'm paying for health insurance, not just health insurance, primary health insurance for Sean and Nate and me, that kind of stuff. But also as an employer, I've got to pay for various types of liability insurance that involve health care if somebody gets injured. You've got, those kinds of things. You've got with your car insurance, chances are there's a hospitalization rider in there that you're paying for. I mean, all those things could go away under a single-payer healthcare system. We would all save money. We wouldn't have these giant blood-sucking leeches stuck to our backs. It would be such a good thing. You're spot on, Nolan. Thank you very much for that. Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Discussing cinema and Manchin. Yeah, right. That many people have pointed out that had the Democrats not lost 6 seats in the House and had gained seats in the Senate instead of having a tie, they'd be fairly much irrelevant. OIC was on Meet the Press a couple of weeks ago, and brilliant. He said, if we had a parliament like any other developed country, sensible country, Manchin and I wouldn't even be in the same party.
Right. That's true.
So,
but we don't have a parliament. We don't have a multi-party system. So,
yeah.
Sean, I think we just hit the end of the show. Okay, Larry, I got to run. The day has gone. The day has flown by. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Never was even intended to be. That's what the demos, right? The Greek word for people. It's So get out there, be the people. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.